The underground chamber was cold, the stone walls pressing in with the weight of centuries, but the flickering candlelight cast a warm glow that softened the edges of the shadows. Around the worn wooden table, Kayla Varys sat with her closest allies, Vera Thane, Master Orin, and Jorin. The air was thick with anticipation, mingled with the scent of beeswax and damp earth. Maps covered in symbols and cryptic markings lay spread before them, evidence of the complex and dangerous web they sought to untangle. Kayla's storm-grey eyes scanned the sprawling Fate Markets districts etched into parchment, each sector humming with secret deals and whispered futures. Her fingers traced a line connecting the most volatile auctions, the places where the precious, fragile prophecies changed hands, and where corruption festered like a slow poison. If we can establish a network of watchers' trusted eyes and ears, we might tip the scales. Kayla said softly, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won conviction. The Fate Market cannot fall back into chaos. Not after all we've sacrificed. Ira leaned forward, her fiery hair catching the candlelight, eyes sharp and resolute. Trust is a currency almost as rare as the prophecies themselves. But I've spent years navigating these twisted alleys. I know who can be counted, unarmed, who cannot. We'll need to be ruthless. Master Orin, seated quietly by the wall, nodded slowly, his silver hair falling across his forehead. His eyes, clouded with age yet piercing, held a depth of sorrow and wisdom. The silence of the divine has left us adrift, he murmured, but our actions can still shape the currents. Fate may be written, but the bearer of the pen is not always clear. Jorin shifted in his seat, his lean frame tense. I've gathered rumors of shadow factions moving against us. They see this new coalition as a threat. We must act swiftly. Keller's gaze hardened. Then we prepare. We guard the market, not just with words, but with presence. We become the shield for futures yet unwritten. The days that followed were a whirlwind of covert meetings and delicate negotiations. Ira's sharp wit and streetwise pragmatism proved invaluable as she parleyed with wary market insiders, balancing threats with promises of reform. Each conversation was a dance on a razor's edge, the risk of betrayal never far from her mind. Yet, with each alliance forged, the coalition's strength grew. One evening, as dusk settled over the city, Master Orin called Kayla aside. They stood by a tall window in his secluded chamber, overlooking the restless streets below. The fading light cast long shadows, and a profound silence enveloped them. You carry a heavy burden, Orin said softly. The silence is not absence, but a space for choice. Remember, Kayla, that the future is not a prison, but a canvas. Kayla nodded, the weight of his words settling deep within her. I will not let the past define me, nor will I allow fear to dictate our path. At dawn, Kayla stood on a balcony overlooking the Fate Market. The mists curled like whispers around the stalls as the first light of day painted the sky in soft hues of amber and rose. The market stirred awake, alive with possibility and danger intertwined. She breathed deeply, the crisp morning air filling her lungs. The fragile pulse of hope beat steadily within her chest. This was not the end, but a beginning, a chance to rewrite the narrative, not just for herself, but for all who depended on the delicate threads of destiny. Yet, beneath the quiet promise of dawn, Kayla knew the battle for the Fate Market soul was far from over. Shadows lingered, and enemies watched from the edges. The price of guarding fate was high, but it was a price she was willing to pay. As the market came alive below, Keller's resolve steeled. The guardians of fate had been called, and she would lead them into the uncertain light ahead. We are not just survivors of prophecy, she whispered to the waking world. We are its keepers. The path forward was fraught with peril, but for the first time in many moons, Kayla felt the stirrings of hope, fragile, yes, but real. And in that hope lay the power to face whatever shadows the future might bring. The fate market awaited, and Kayla Veres was ready to defend it with everything she had left. But as the sun rose higher, a faint chill brushed the air, a reminder that the forces opposing her would not rest. The coming days would test her courage, her alliances, and the very limits of her strength. And in that crucible, the true measure of a guardian would be revealed. The rain came softly at first, a gentle tapping on the cobblestones that lined the narrow street. I paused before the modest stone house, the faint amber light behind curtained windows flickering like a heartbeat in the cold night. My breath clouded the air in front of me, each exhale a fragile thread weaving me back to a past I thought I had lost forever. The years of silence hung heavy between us, but tonight I dared to hope. I had come to this place not as the royal seer once revered, but as a broken woman seeking the unseen bonds that could anchor me to something real again. The world I had known, the fate market with its endless auctions of futures, had nearly swallowed me whole. Yet here, beneath the weight of a fractured past, I searched for a thread of connection, a lifeline. The door creaked open before I could knock, and there she stood, my mother. Her face showed the map of years etched in soft lines, her silver-streaked dark hair catching the flicker of the lantern light. Her eyes, cautious yet open, met mine, and in that moment, the years of estrangement seemed to falter. "Kayla," she said, voice tentative yet steady. "Mother," I replied, voice barely above a whisper. Inside, the warmth of the hearth was a balm to the chill that had settled in my bones. We sat close together, the firelight casting dancing shadows against the walls, as years of silence broke in trembling words. I told her of the market's darkness, the prophecy I had sold, and the ruin it had wrought. She listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap, a well of unspoken pain and understanding filling the room. Outside, the world wedded dangerous and uncertain, but here, in this quiet room, I found a fragile hope I hadn't dared to claim before. Elsewhere in the city, the pulse of the fate market throbbed beneath the veneer of civility. In a dimly lit tavern, Ira and Jorin huddled at a corner table cluttered with empty tankards. The low murmur of patrons and the clinking of glass filled the air. But their focus was sharp, their eyes darting toward the door as they exchanged whispered fragments of information. "The next auction is set for the crescent moon," Jorin murmured, voice barely audible. "Malrek's faction is tightening its grip." Ira's jaw clenched, fiery red hair catching the flicker of candlelight. "We'll need every ally we can find." Keller's reaching out to her family that might just tip the balance. Their cautious determination was a counterpoint to the isolation I had felt for so long. With old friends like Ira and Jorin by my side, the maze of the fate market seemed less impenetrable. Days later, a chance encounter in a rain-slick alley brought me face to face with Silas. His tall frame was shadowed beneath a soaked cloak, the dim light reflecting off the wet stones beneath our feet. His dark eyes held that same calculating edge, but there was something new, unspoken respect beneath the tension. "You're stirring things again," he said, voice low, edged with warning. "I'm trying to fix what was broken," I answered, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Beware that fixing doesn't become breaking," he cautioned, before slipping into the night. The rivalry between us was far from over, but beneath it lay the possibility of something more, perhaps, even forgiveness. As the threads of my past began to weave anew, I realized the unseen bonds were not just between blood and old friendships. but between hope and courage, fear and resolve. Each connection was a stitch in the fabric of a future I could help shape, not by prophecy alone, but by the strength of those who stood with me. The road ahead was uncertain, shadowed by the machinations of Malrek and the ever-watchful Fate Market. Yet, as I stepped back into the night, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. I was no longer alone. The fragile threads of destiny are woven in silence, but their strength lies in the unseen bonds we dare to trust. And now, more than ever, I was ready to face what came next. The night settled around the city like a breath held in anticipation. Somewhere beyond the walls of stone and firelight, the Fate Market's wheels turned relentlessly. But here, in the quiet heart of a rekindled connection, a new chapter began, one written not just in shadows, but in the light of hope. I would not let the past define me. I would not be a prisoner of fate's silent decree. I was Curator, once lost, now finding my way back through the unseen bonds that hold us all. And this was only the beginning. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the streets glistening with a fragile sheen. I lingered by the threshold of my mother's home, a fleeting smile touching my lips as I felt the warmth of belonging seep into my bones. I had taken the first step toward mending what was broken, and with every bond rekindled, the Fate Market's shadows seemed just a little less daunting. Tomorrow, the battles would resume. But tonight, I held on to the fragile promise of unseen bonds threads, strong enough to bind a broken world together, and I would need them all. The morning light fell unevenly across the sprawling expanse of the Fate Market, casting long, flickering shadows between the stalls and auction platforms where destinies were bartered like common goods. The air was thick with a mix of anticipation and suspicion, a palpable tension that seemed to pulse with every whispered negotiation and every furtive glance. At the heart of this ever-shifting chaos stood Curator, her storm-grey eyes surveying the scene with a quiet intensity that belied the storm she was about to unleash. The hall where the central auctions were held was unlike any other place in the kingdom, a cavernous space that echoed with the clamour of voices, the scrape of feet against stone, and the occasional sharp crack of a gavel sealing a fateful deal. Today, however, Kayla was not here as a passive observer or a desperate shadow lurking in the corners. Today she was a force of change, a beacon of fragile hope amid the corruption that had long strangled the market's soul. As the crowd settled, a hush fell over the room. Kayla stepped forward, her presence commanding attention not through arrogance, but through the weight of her story and the undeniable truth in her words. "This market," she began, her voice steady and clear, "has long been a place where greed overshadows destiny, where the sacred trust of prophecy is traded like a mere coin." She paused, letting the silence stretch, drawing the eyes of noble buyers, shrewd brokers, and wary oracles alike. But it need not be so. We stand at the crossroads of fate and choice. It is time for transparency, for ethics, and for a market that honors the fragile threads that bind our futures. Murmurs rippled through the audience, some skeptical, others hopeful. The proposition was radical, a challenge to the entrenched powers who had thrived in the shadows. Kayla outlined her vision, clear records of prophetic sales, protections against exploitation, and a council of seers and traders tasked with oversight. It was a blueprint for reform that many had whispered about, but none dared voice aloud. Outside the hall, the market's labyrinthine corridors pulsed with renewed energy. Ira Thane moved like a shadow among the stalls, her fiery red hair a beacon of fierce loyalty and pragmatism. She negotiated with brokers and buyers, her sharp wit cutting through the skepticism like a blade. "Change is a hard bargain," she told a hesitant trader, "but it's the only one worth making." Her steady eyes met his, unyielding and true, and slowly, resistance gave way to tentative agreement. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit chamber away from the bustle, Myra and Silas faced each other across a narrow table. The air between them was charged, a mixture of old rivalries and the grudging respect born of necessity. "You don't trust me," Myra said, her voice low but firm. Silas's cold eyes flickered with something almost like regret. "Nor do I trust you. But the market is changing, whether I like it or not." Their conversation was a delicate dance of words and intentions, each probing the other's limits while acknowledging the shifting tides that no one could ignore. It was clear that the path ahead would be fraught with tension and uneasy alliances. As dusk settled over the city, Kayla found herself alone on a balcony overlooking the sprawling maze of the Fate Market. The fading light painted the streets in hues of gold and shadow, a reminder of the delicate balance between hope and despair. She breathed in the cool evening air, feeling the weight of the day's battles settle around her like a cloak. Her thoughts drifted to the countless prophecies that had passed through these streets, some fulfilled, others twisted by greed and ambition. But tonight, there was a new wind blowing through the market, carrying with it the promise of something more. "The future is not written," she whispered to the gathering night. "It is forged by those brave enough to seize it." The road ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers both seen and unseen. But, for the first time in a long while, Kayla allowed herself to believe that the fragile threads of destiny might be rewoven by fate alone, but by courage, choice, and the unyielding hope of a broken oracle determined to reclaim her voice. And as the market winds shifted, so too did the tides of destiny, setting the stage for a new chapter in the story of a world where futures were no longer commodities to be bought and sold, but promises to be honored and protected. The echoes of change stirred in the shadows, and Kayla knew the true test was yet to come. The legacy of shadows deepened as dusk settled over the Fate Market, folding the city into a quiet anticipation. Kayla Varys moved through the narrow corridors beneath the sprawling network of auction halls and clandestine meeting rooms. Her steps measured, her mind weighed heavy with memories. The air was thick with the scent of parchment, candle wax, and the faint metallic temps of old secrets. Each breath she drew was a reminder of the fractured path that had brought her here. It was here, in these shadowed veins of the market, that her past awaited embodied in the form of Silas. The chamber where they met was cold, its stone walls bearing centuries of whispered deals and broken promises. A single candle flickered on the rough-hewn table between them, casting long, wavering shadows that danced like specters. Silas stood with his arms crossed, his eyes sharp and unyielding, reflecting the flickering flame. Keller's gaze met his, and for a moment the weight of silence was heavier than any spoken word. "You shouldn't have come," Silas said, his voice low but edged with something that felt like pain beneath the anger. Keller's lips pressed into a thin line. "Nor should you have stayed away." Their history was tangled like the braids in her hair complex, knotted with rivalry and regret. He had once been her apprentice, eager and bright, but ambition had twisted their alliance into a rivalry that left scars far deeper than either wished to admit. The prophecy she had sold, the war it ignited, and the ruin that followed had driven a wedge between them, one that neither had found the courage to bridge until now. "You carry the weight of what happened," Silas continued, stepping closer, "but you cannot carry it alone." Kayla shook her head, the storm-grey eyes clouded with doubt. "I don't know if I deserve to be forgiven. Silas's gaze softened just a fraction. Perhaps forgiveness isn't the point. Perhaps it's about acceptance of our faults, our choices, and the shadows we cast. The words hung in the chilly air like a fragile offering. Keller's heart fluttered with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Could she truly face the legacy of shadows that clung so tightly to her soul? Before she could respond, a quiet voice interrupted the charged atmosphere. Ira Thane stood in the doorway, her fiery red hair a stark contrast to the muted stone around them. Her gaze was steady, filled with the fierce loyalty that had never wavered. You both need to stop running from what's behind you. If you don't, the fate market will consume us all. The reminder was sharp and clear, slicing through Keller's hesitation. She nodded, drawing strength from Ira's presence. Together, they left the chamber, stepping into the fading light of the city's dusky embrace. Later, Kayla found herself in the secluded garden, gifted by Master Orin, a place where time seemed to slow and the burdens of the world softened. The air was fragrant with jasmine, and the last rays of sunlight painted the sky with strokes of amber and rose. Master Orin, draped in his faded ceremonial robes, sat quietly on a stone bench, eyes clouded yet piercing. The silence of the divine, he began softly, is not absence but a space between what is known and what must be discovered. It is where fate and free will entwine in a dance as old as time. Kayla listened, the cryptic wisdom settling over her like a bomb. The parable he shared spoke of shadows and light, of choices made in darkness that forged paths to dawn. It was an invitation to embrace not only the light of hope, but the shadows of her past, the fears, the failures, the scars that shaped her. You are not your mistakes, Master Orin said, but the courage you summoned to rise beyond them. The words stirred a quiet resolve deep within Kayla. She felt the legacy of shadows no longer as a chain but as a tapestry complex, imperfect yet beautiful in its entirety. As night fell, Kayla ascended to a rooftop overlooking the sprawling city. Lanterns flickered like distant stars, their fragile glow mirroring the fragile hope blossoming within her chest. The cool night air whispered against her skin as she drew a symbol in the era. Delicate spiral entwined with a star, an emblem of renewal and resilience. Her breath was steady, her gaze unwavering as she whispered a vow to the night. I will no longer be defined by the shadows I carry, but by the light I choose to kindle. Below, the fate market pulsed with the restless energy of countless destinies intertwined. And above, Kayla stood a beacon of resolve in a world teetering between ruin and redemption. The legacy of shadows was hers to bear, but also hers to transform. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and sacrifice. But for the first time in a long while, Kayla embraced the unknown with a heart unburdened by fear. As the first faint glow of dawn crept over the horizon, she turned from the edge of the rooftop with a steady step and a soul ignited by the promise of a future rewritten. And in that fragile light, the fate market awaited her next move, uncertain, but not without hope. The shadows of the past would not claim her, not this time. With a final glance at the awakening sky, Kayla descended, ready to face whatever destiny dared to challenge her resolve. The room was silent except for the faint crackling of the incense as it curled into the shadows, casting delicate spirals that seemed to dance with the forgotten whispers of fate. Kayla Varys stood at the chamber's center, her storm-grey eyes fixed on the ancient runes inscribed into the stone floor. Despite the chill that clung to the air, a warmth blossomed within her chest, fragile ember of hope battling the long-held weight of guilt and despair. Her fingers hovered just above the carved symbols, hesitating for a moment, as if the very act of touching them might unravel the tenuous threads holding her resolve together. The faded glow of the runes pulsed gently, as though recognizing her presence, acknowledging the frailty and strength entwined within her. This chamber, hidden deep beneath the city's labyrinthine streets, had been a sanctuary for seers, long before the fate market twisted the sacred art into a trade of greed and power. Irathane's quiet footsteps echoed softly in the doorway. The red strands of her hair caught the flickering candlelight, a vivid flame against the somber stone. She did not speak, merely offering the steady presence Kayla had come to depend on in these darkest hours. With a small, reassuring nod, Ira conveyed the unspoken promise of solidarity, that Kayla would not walk this path alone. Kayla drew a deep breath, tasting the mingled scents of burnt herbs and ancient stone. Her mind swirled with memories of the prophecy she had once sold, the war it had ignited, and the ruin that followed. Those memories had chained her to despair, but now, in this sanctified space, they felt less like shackles and more like threads waiting to be ripped. A soft voice broke the stillness, Master Orin's, carrying the weight of years and wisdom. Fate is not a river carved in stone, but a tapestry woven with many hands, he intoned, his eyes clouded with age, yet bright with meaning. The divine may fall silent, but within that silence lies the space for choice. Keller's gaze lifted to meet his, finding in his enigmatic demeanor a reflection of her own turmoil and the faintest glimmer of hope. Is it truly possible to reshape what has been set? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The threads are never fixed, Orin replied. They respond to the courage of those who dare to grasp the loom. With steady fingers, Kayla began to trace the symbols, the runes responding beneath her touch. The glow intensified, bathing the chamber in a soft, golden light that chased away the shadows. Each mark she redefined was an act of defiance against the deterministic chains that had bound her. Each stroke a declaration that the future was hers to shape. The ritual was not merely symbolic, it was a reclaiming of her voice, her agency, and her humanity. As the light swelled, she felt the weight of past failures lift incrementally, replaced by a burgeoning strength that surged through her veins. Beside her, Ira's silent presence was a bomb, steady and fierce. Master Orin's words echoed through her mind, urging her to trust in the silent promise the divine had left behind. The silence was not absence but invitation in, opening for free will to flourish where once only predestination had reigned. As the ritual reached its crescendo, the runes flared brighter still, casting shifting shadows that played like specters of the past against the chamber walls. Kayla closed her eyes, feeling the threads of fate unfurl and weave anew under her touch. A quiet smile touched her lips, not of certainty, but of resolve. When the light finally dimmed, the chamber settled into a profound stillness, charged with the silent promise of a future unbound. Kayla opened her eyes to find Ira's gaze filled with quiet pride and Master Orin's with a rare, approving warmth. "You have taken the first step," Orin said softly. "Now, the true weaving begins." Kayla nodded, the weight of her new burden balanced by an unyielding hope. The threads of destiny had been rewoven tonight, not by prophecy alone, but by courage, choice, and the fragile, fierce power of redemption. And with that, she stepped forward, no longer bound by the shadows of her past, but guided by the light of a future she would define. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and temptation. But Kayla Varys was no longer the broken oracle cast aside. She was a weaver of fate, a guardian of hope, and a beacon against the encroaching darkness. And as the chamber doors closed behind her, The whispered promise of transformation lingered in the air, a fragile hope poised to grow. Outside, the fate market pulsed with its usual chaos, unaware that the threads of destiny had begun to shift. Keller's hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the thrill of possibility. Tomorrow was unwritten, and for the first time in a long time, that truth was hers to embrace. But even as she walked into the night, a question lingered in her mind, sharp and insistent. Could she protect this fragile new path from those who would see it undone? The answer would come in time. For now, the threads were rewoven. The future was hers to claim.